Hi, and welcome to the President's Forum podcast. I'm Wesley Smith, the Executive Director of the President's Forum, and today we're exploring the future of education and work in an age of technology. We're joined by Excelsior President David Scable to explore the critical role of cognitive abilities in today's rapidly evolving workforce. As artificial intelligence and automation reshape our professional landscape, we'll discuss the role of higher education in adding value by developing cognitive abilities. David, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Wes. Great to be with you.
Let's start here. Cognitive abilities versus technical skills. Tell us the difference.
Sure. And I should preface this by saying that cognitive abilities is the term that I use. Most people don't. But I think it's important to separate these long-term cognitive abilities from what we normally talk about as skills, because oftentimes we conflate the two and we tend to talk about skills as sort of basic widget making stuff, right? You can code, you can weld, you can do these kinds of things, but that's very different from the ability to reason critically or the ability to communicate with multiple audiences over different topics, or the ability to work collaboratively in teams with people who are different from you, who might be in other countries, and to be able to do that at a distance, right? So these, which requires a certain amount of emotional intelligence in addition to the ability to communicate. So these things are, I think, really fundamental to how our thinking works and how we approach navigating the complex world that we live in. And when we talk to employers, when I specifically talk to employers, and this hasn't changed in 30 years, when I talk to employers, it's those cognitive abilities that are far more important to them than the specific technical skills that you might apply in a job today, but that aren't transferable to the next job. And so when I talk to employers, I think the first thing they tell me is, I want people who can identify problems. They don't even have to know how to solve them, but being able to recognize that there's a problem is critically important, right? One of the examples that I like to use is, would you rather hire a welder that simply is really good at welding, but that's all he does, or a welder who can say, hey, I noticed that there might be a stress crack here. And we really need to figure out what's causing that stress crack, because I can weld it, but if it keeps happening, we can have a catastrophic failure. Those are two very different approaches to a skill set, namely welding. But the person who can recognize the broader issues and the potentially systemic problems is a far more valuable and useful employee than somebody who simply just goes and does the work.
So, David, how do you cultivate that in a person? I mean, a lot of that seems very native, or it's a natural talent, and somebody picks that up. But I know in higher education we can do a good job in helping teach these abilities. What do you think? What's the role of higher ed in that?
Well, these days the liberal arts have become gotten a bad rap, but that's exactly what the liberal arts are supposed to be doing. I'm not sure a lot of schools teach it very well, but I think the key is to teach it directly to students, teach them directly how to critically reason, how to identify problems, how to work through problems, how to construct rational arguments, how to think through logically the steps of a process, how to recognize systems and how to think systemically. Those are all things that we teach, and we can teach that stuff. But you're not going to teach it in a 10-week quick class. It's a process. It requires real thinking, and in my opinion, it should be integrated into the disciplines. disciplines. So these aren't things that you tag on. This is sort of the fundamental way you approach any discipline. And so we should incorporate that into whatever discipline we happen to be teaching.
To your point, it's not like you need a class or you have a class on critical thinking. It's that you implement critical thinking in each one of your classes or emotional intelligence. How do you approach that at Excelsior?
So I think it's both actually, and we certainly approach it in both ways. I think one of the first things that you need to do is to help bring to light for students what critical thinking is. So you do need to give them a critical thinking class, but walk them through real life examples of how you have to think critically. You know, the irony is we all do it natively to a certain extent every time we go buy milk, right? You gotta make some decisions about how you get there, et cetera, et cetera. But but we don't do it as intentionally as we need to. And so I think helping students have an intentional focus on critical thinking, emotional intelligence, communication skills, et cetera, to be able to work with others and to get their ideas across in ways that others will actually understand, critically important, and then take that and incorporate it into whatever disciplinary focus you're doing. So if you're doing computer programming, this is another thing I tell my team. If we're teaching somebody computer science and that person leaves and doesn't know how to communicate with salespeople or doesn't know how to communicate up and down the chain or isn't able to work well with the guy or the gal who's sitting next to him, that's a lousy employee by anybody's standards, right? Same thing in nursing. If all you can do is you go treat a patient and you administer drugs, but you have no sensitivity to that person's religious background or no ability to talk to and communicate with a doctor or a med tech or somebody else in the hospital, you're a lousy nurse. And so I think those are the really important things that we need to be helping our students do.
How do employers evaluate a potential talent for this cognitive ability skill set, that they're looking for? The type of skills that bring immense value to employers. Is it that they're just relying on higher ed to embed that in the study program and the curriculum, or I, you've had conversations with employers. How do they look for these types of skills?
So it varies a lot. So right now nationally we're having a conversation about the value of higher ed degrees and that most jobs don't require the degrees. The reality is that the degree was kind of shorthand for people who can do a lot of the stuff that you and I have been talking about. And they can do it because they've been exposed to it for 4 years while they were in college, and so they kind of bring it to the job. And so employers take that for granted that somebody who has a bachelor's degree can actually do those things. The person might not know how to apply it in that particular employer's context and needs to learn how to do that. But that the person has an aptitude for it, I think a lot of employers take for granted. But I've talked to employers who are very frustrated, especially with individuals who are coming out of high school who haven't gone to college, and they're frustrated because very basic stuff these people don't. It's not natural to them. For example, showing up to work on time, telling the truth, being honest, you know, not getting angry when something doesn't go your way. I mean, a really basic stuff, right? Knowing how to dress. And then, of course, you start to go up from that to the more fundamental and important things that you and I have been talking about.
Right. Well, we live in an age of technology. How does AI and, rapid innovation impact this discussion? What does this mean for people moving forward in the workforce?
So this is a great question, and I think the AI issue brings this to light because what we know about people who are going to be working closely with AI systems is that it's not about programming. It's not about the technical aspects of it. It's actually about knowing how to ask the questions. And knowing how to ask the questions is exactly what you and I have been talking about, right? How do you formulate a question in a way that helps you get an answer that is usable? That requires tremendous critical thinking. It also it requires a pretty good command of the English language to be able to do it.
Right. It seems as though also artificial intelligence is great at answering specific questions.
Yeah.
AI is, hey, I need information. What AI doesn't provide is the ability to think through issues and apply that information appropriately.
That's absolutely right. And AI doesn't read minds. So if you ask a stupid question, you're going to get a stupid answer.
Right. Right. Well, it seems more important than ever that cognitive ability is cultivated, developed, especially in an age of technology where it seems like a gap in the information age, right? Where that reasoning ability and you used the welding example and identifying, oh, we got to get to root causes here. I haven't seen AI applications that are particularly effective or that address those types of issues versus pure information gathering.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think where my criticism of higher ed goes along the lines that you and I have been talking about is that there's a lack of holistic intentionality to help our students understand this stuff. Right, the way we structure curricula is you get Professor Jones and Professor Smith and 20 other faculty to put together their own individual courses, and then we assume that magically the student is going to know how to connect that information, and that magically they're going to put the critical reasoning in there, right, without being overly taught how to do that. And I think this is where we really fall short. And in every course we ought to be overtly intentionally helping students understand, oh, here's what's going on, here's how you can use this stuff in the outside world, and as a matter of fact, it's applicable over various things. It's applicable, if it's an engineering class, you can apply it when you're in your basement trying to figure out why your hot water heater is not working, just like you can when you're designing a bridge. And pick any other discipline, I mean, it should work the same way.
David, summarize the bottom line of our discussion today for our listeners.
It is not hyperbole to say that higher education can transform the nation. And there are plenty of examples in how it's done that. If we look, for example, at the results of the GI Bill after World War II, um, the president at the time in Congress used the GI Bill because they needed to park the GIs somewhere, because they were worried that they were going to go back into a depression because these returning soldiers would have no work. So they put them into college. And what ended up happening is that the level of knowledge in this country grew exponentially, but not just among the privileged, which was what was happening prior to World War II, but groups that were shunned from college: Jews, Catholics, blacks, right? Minority members who weren't allowed in college all of a sudden had access. And it was because, as a nation, we decided that we were going to provide access to these folks. And it transformed the country. Not only did every dollar invested um, generate $5 in revenue for the country, but we got to the space race. We completely transformed the infrastructure of the country. This all happened from 1945 to about 1965. And it was directly because of the investments that we collectively made in education and especially in higher education. So there's no question about the transformative power. It's more a question of the will to invest and the will to support.
Right. Well, I want to keep this on the front burner when it comes to higher education and where we're moving in higher education, because there is a lot of merit, and there's a lot of conversation around, hey, we need to focus on skills-based learning, and those skills have to be applicable to a job. And so while we have that, this is a really good conversation to balance that out with, yes, skills are really important and technical skills and abilities are really important. But the most valuable skill are cognitive abilities, the ability for our students and for members of society to apply that skill and knowledge in very productive ways. So I think it's a really important topic while we're addressing all of these other topics that deserve to be addressed.
I do too, and I appreciate the opportunity to chat about this with you.
Yeah, thanks for coming on today, David. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
And for those of you who want to stay updated on more conversations like this one, follow the President's Forum on social media and subscribe to our channel. Thanks.